These are never fun videos to make. It's always some like tragic twist and turn, and somehow, even though it's always the same, it's always different too. There's always some new twist on the terribleness that you haven't hit before. But the club that we have before us that is on the brink of failure is Sheffield Wednesday, not to be confused with Sheffield United, a completely separate club that recently sold for £111 million. No, Sheffield Wednesday is in trouble. And the fact that they're in trouble, I think, is a very, very bad sign for the state of the English Football League. Not the Premier League, obviously, but the English Football League and the unrestrained spending. And I also think the unrestrained expectation to spend that exists in football generally, but particularly more so than anywhere else in the English Championship, where the glory and the money of the Premier League is but a hair's breadth away, right? Where you can see the promised land that is so cruelly kept from you on the other side of some sort of demented playoff defeat for Coventry City once again. But Sheffield Wednesday is in the shitter completely. And the reason they're in the headlines right now is their coach, Danny Roll, has decided to leave. Basically, he worked on a mutual agreement to exit his contract early. He's a bit of a hotshot manager because Sheffield Wednesday is not a team that you would expect to be in financial trouble, which I feel like it's an even bigger indictment for the EFL. Because Danny Roll had this team contending for a playoff spot until they faded. I think they won like one of their last 9 games or something. But they were in contention for a playoff spot. Out of the championship into the Premier League with 10 matches to go. It was right there for them. They had a chance. And Danny Roll was the guy that was seen as responsible for that because this club has actually been in financial trouble for years. But that kind of success and being able to overcome the different issues that they've had, it's not been enough for them. Danny Roll leaving was something that people had seen for a while, but it is basically this is the match that's going to maybe burn down the house because most of his coaching staff has run out of a contract as well, and the team is actually completely up Schitt's Creek without a path. Like, this team is in the championship, had a shout at getting into the Premier League this past season, and they're kind of falling apart as a team. Let me give you an example of where this story is headed. Sheffield Wednesday starts its season on August 10th. Against Leicester City. That will be a tough match on the road against a team that just got relegated from the Prem. It will also be the first time that the senior team has been on the field since May 3rd because they have not scheduled or played a friendly. Like, this team's just not... even Danny Roll, they're not functioning. Danny Roll didn't show up at the required start date of the preseason, which I asked, why are they even doing preseason? They're not playing any friendlies. They're just showing up to training all of a sudden again. Danny Roll didn't show up at the beginning. Then eventually he showed up, and then that was eventually a tool to negotiate his exit from the club, right? But he wasn't even around. The coach wasn't even around at this point. I mean, it's preposterous. It's ridiculous, right? The fact that the head coach wasn't showing up. You got multiple players that didn't show up. Like Barry Bannon, Callum Patterson, and defender Akin Famewo are out of a contract next week after rejecting deals, and it's unclear whether they've been paid. After contemplating a no-show, Bannon, the captain, is understood to have reported for duty, while the other 2 didn't turn up. So you've got players that just aren't showing up for training. Granted, these guys are going out of a contract soon, but that highlights another big issue that's been going on with Sheffield Wednesday. That is, they're not paying their players. Right, the club is not effectively paying their players, and the hammer has really come down as a result of that. Because this is from the article in The Athletic, the club is unable to spend money on either loans or permanent transfers until January of 2027. January of 2027. That is 3 transfer windows, 2 summer transfer windows. That's this summer, January 2026, summer 2026, January 2027 is the next time they can spend money in a transfer window. I mean, after not paying your players, losing your coaching staff, losing players like this, you can't go out and acquire new players for 3 transfer windows. That's murderous. I mean, just looking at that right there, and obviously you got the knowledge about how the preseason's going, which we'll come back to that. This club is dead. I mean, not actually dead, but I mean, what snowball's chance in hell do you have of staying up in the championship if you're not running an effective preseason? You don't have a coach or a coaching staff. They don't even have a director of football. They're running like a skeleton ship crew, and they still can't even pay everybody. You're probably wondering, and I can't believe I haven't said his name at this point, who the owner is. It's a guy named Dejpan Chansiri. Now, Dejpan Chansiri is not the worst owner we've ever come across in covering clubs that are on death's door, or at least incredibly unhealthy. He is a guy that at least doesn't say heinous or terrible things publicly, but he is also a guy that seems to be a bit disconnected. And stop me if you've heard this before. His family, and particularly his individual fortune, has dwindled pretty significantly since he bought the club. But he bought the club back in 2015. And in 2015, they were worth, him and his family were worth about twice as much as they are now. Just in terms of like stock price in this seafood company that they own. And over that time as well, I'm going to see if I can find the exact amount, because it is an amount that leaves an impression on you. The total losses over his 10-year stewardship at the club are more than 150 million pounds. It's a shitload of money. That is a metric fuck ton of money. Like, I'm not saying I feel bad for Dejpan Chansiri. Right? You can't. He's the guy that bought the club. He's the guy that decided to spend the money, 150 million pounds loss over the course of 10 years, which he's not worth that much, by the way. Like, the money's coming from the family that owns more of the seafood conglomerate or something that's funneling money into Sheffield Wednesday, and now clearly they're tightening the faucet so that he doesn't have as much money to be able to pay for all this shit anymore. But there is some misdirected anger, I think, on like a lack of spending effort, because he has spent a lot of money. He's just spent it really stupidly. Right? I don't know. There's always just going to be a collection of fans that are like, oh, he just should spend more money and should put more money in the club. And it's like, yeah, if you had all this money, then you would do that for Sheffield Wednesday. I don't know. We end up in a lot of these situations where I almost feel bad for the owners. Then you remind yourself that they made the decision to spend this money. They're the ones that spent it poorly. They're the ones that, signed contracts they weren't sure that they were going to be able to pay. Like, he hasn't paid players' wages for 2 months. He's paid some of them, which is where we get to the incredibly creative shitty part of this, which I'm very excited to tell you about because I love creative shittiness. But there is a misguided expectation from fans, I think, that owners should be willing to go into like grievous debt or basically spend all of the money that they have in order for their club to keep up with the Joneses. Right? I don't know what the acceptable spending level is for a club like Sheffield Wednesday to turn a profit. Not even turn a profit, but just not take a major loss. But whatever it is, the level of the championship is running way higher than that. And if you want to own a championship club, you better have to have 150 million to burn. Or else I think the fans are probably, they're going to get upset and get mad at you. Right? And shit's all going to hit the fan. And he's been trying to sell the club, but there is an issue. Okay? He's trying to sell the club. Obviously, he needs to sell the club. The issue is that his valuation of the club is way too high. Unsurprisingly, he's a bit delusional about how much the club is worth. Apparently, he was asking for twice as much as Sheffield United, so like 220 million pounds. But according to The Guardian, I believe it was their article, the valuation's more like 40 million because they don't own the stadium. Chansiri actually owns the stadium, which was and this is just like the worst business move ever, which brings me back to like this guy shot himself in the foot repeatedly 100 times. Like, you hear how much money, you probably understand my thought process. You hear how much money these people lose, and you go, wow, they actually spent a lot. And then you hear some of the crazy, weird shit they did to try and, like, alleviate that problem, and you go, he sold the stadium to himself. This is like a Barcelona-type move. So he bought the stadium from the club in order to try and put the purchase of the stadium, like the sale of the stadium, onto the profit and loss balance sheet for FFP reasons. This apparently turned out to be illegal. They got docked 6 points, but then at the same time, that 6-point penalty was suspended because it was the COVID time and they were suspending point penalties for FFP violations. So this is not the first, this past year is not the first time that Des Punch and Siri has ended up, up Schitt's Creek without a paddle. But then let's get to the really creative shittiness, because he has paid some players' wages. I had to find it on the Guardian article because they do a great job of describing it. Wednesday are understood to have belatedly paid some players last month's wages. Payments for March were also late, but not all of Danny Roll's squad received their salaries. A club source said May's salary payments had been targeted, with Chansiri making sure the younger players and those under contract were paid in order to protect their resale value, whereas older squad members approaching the end of their contracts were not. For some reason, this whole situation feels like it would be better if he was just paying whoever he could, but the fact that this is planned, that it was mapped out who they wanted to give the money to so that those players wouldn't be allowed to terminate their contracts, because that's the FIFA rule, by the way. If you don't get paid for 2 whole months, you are allowed to terminate your contract. The club has no right to keep you anymore. And so they can leave and go wherever. So if he manages to make the payments to these few players that have great resale value, that are under long contracts, then he keeps those guys from being able to leave. While all the other guys, like those people we were talking about earlier, they're just shit out of luck. They're just not going to get paid, even though they signed a contract that says they're going to get paid. This is a pet peeve of mine. This has always been a pet peeve of mine. If you sign a contract saying you're going to pay somebody a certain amount of money for something, you pay it. If they satisfy the terms of the contract, you have to pay it. This is like the basis of all business interaction. And yet in football all the time, especially when hidden grounds videos like Zealand makes, he talks to me about all these deals that, so many clubs, late payments, reduced payments, even up to Barcelona. Barcelona's gone back to its own players and been like, take a smaller contract. We can't afford to pay what we agreed to pay you. And then they just bully him into doing it. If that sort of shit can happen in Barcelona, it can happen anywhere. And now Sheffield Wednesday's manipulating, targeting their contract payments in order to keep certain players of the club that could potentially have resale value. Also, just going to throw it out there, the stadium is in need of desperate repair. It is between, let me make sure that I got this right. 126-year-old ground so poor that the boiler was unable to generate sufficient hot water for the players to shower in comfort at various points last season. I'm sorry. If I can get a hot shower in my shitty New York apartment, if you play professional football in the championship, you should probably be getting a hot shower. That should be a minimum requirement. They're like mid-renovation on one of the stands in the stadium, too, and there is no set finishing date for that. So everything you can possibly imagine is going wrong at this club right now, and I feel really bad for the fans. The people I feel the worst for are the fans, because there's nothing you can do about it. They're making signs, right? They're trying to get Chansiri to sell. He's saying he wants to sell, but in the end of the day, he owns the club, and his valuation is too high, which means nobody's going to buy it until his valuation goes down, and the club's only going to get worse until that happens. It's like a shitty cycle that's just going to spiral, and now you've got a first team that's missing players, that has players not getting paid, that can't sign anybody for 3 transfer windows, that's about to start the season against maybe the best team in the championship.